We've all found ourselves in conversation and felt attacked. Like, we started off talking about one thing, and then the other person twisted our words, and before we knew it, we lost our cool, lost respect in their eyes, and maybe even acted like a jerk. Now, I don't normally do the same person twice in a row, but this interview between Kathy Newman and Jordan Peterson was just too interesting of an opportunity to discuss how you can handle someone who uses subtle conversational tricks to bully you into looking dumb. So in this video, you're going to see firsthand some of the most common tricks that people might be using on you, and you're also going to learn how to reverse those so that you can walk out of a kind of aggressive situation having earned more respect than you had going in. So first off, to stop a conversational bully, you have to realize what's going on before it's too late. Now, typically a person will reveal their aggressive attitude early on with their tone of voice and their word choice, kind of like this.
But it's not, I wasn't specifically aiming this message at young men to begin with. It just kind of turned out that way.
And it's mostly, you admit, it's mostly men listening.
In this case, Kathy is indicating very clearly that she thinks Jordan has done something wrong. Otherwise, why would she use the word admit? She makes her stance clear a moment later when she implies that he should be bothered for being divisive. Just watch.
Does it bother you that your audience is predominantly male? Isn't that a bit divisive?
The point here is that even when they're being passive-aggressive, people will often indicate that they're about to attack you before they actually do. So if you hear someone say something like, well, what do you have to say for yourself? Be prepared. That person thinks that you've done something wrong, and you need to be very careful what you say next. Not because you did do something wrong, but because a conversational bully may be trying to trap you into saying something that you disagree with so that they can attack that straw man. And the first way that this often happens is called the "so you're saying" trap. Here's what it looks like.
So you're saying women have some sort of duty to sort of help fix the crisis of masculinity? Women want to dominate. Is that what you're saying?
No,
right. So you're saying that anyone who believes in equality, whether you call them feminists, call them whatever you want to call them, should basically give up because it ain't going to happen. Let me just get this straight. You're saying that we should organize our societies along the lines of the lobsters.
The general pattern here is that someone says, so you're saying, and then proceeds to oversimplify or mischaracterize what you actually said. I won't spend too long here because it's very easy to spot and it's rather simple to avoid and get around by saying, well, actually what I was saying is, and then repeat yourself.
Along the lines of the lobsters.
I'm saying that it's inevitable that there will be continuity in the way that animals and human beings organize their structures.
But there's a much sneakier way that people may mischaracterize your beliefs and then attack them. Basically, it's when someone's words imply that you believe something you don't, and they don't actually say it. So in business, they call this assuming the sale. Like when a car salesman says, so would you like that with the leather interior or with the fabric interior? Before you've even decided to buy the car. Now, with a several $1,000 purchase, you're likely to notice this and say, whoa, 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 who said I was buying in the first place? But it's very likely that this is happening to you in conversation all the time and you don't even notice. Here's how it might look.
Yeah, but those reasons, why should women put up with those reasons?
Embedded in the question, why should women put up with it, are several important presuppositions, namely, one, that there is something to put up with, and two, that Jordan thinks women should put up with it. Now, the trap here for Jordan would be to answer Kathy's question directly, and many of us fall into it in similar situations. Then we start arguing for things that we don't even really believe, just out of habit. Instead, you need to identify that hidden presupposition and then call it out. So watch how carefully Jordan listens to Kathy's questions so that he can catch what she's not saying.
Why should women be content
I'm not
not
saying
to
that
get
they
to the
should
top?
put up with it. I'm saying that the claim...
Here's another example of assuming the sale from later in that conversation. See if you can spot the hidden presupposition and ask yourself what you might say to respond to it.
Which women do a lot of.
But why shouldn't women have the right to choose not to have children?
So what's the hidden presupposition? That Jordan thinks women must have children. And of course, he defends a woman's right to make any decision about that she wants.
The right to choose those demanding careers.
They do. They can. Yeah, that's fine.
But you're saying that makes them unhappy.
Here's one more example. See if you can spot the hidden presupposition here.
So you're not going to say to your followers now, quit the abuse, quit the anger.
Did you catch it? The presupposition is that Jordan's followers are abusing people. Now, he can't answer that question directly. He has to address that hidden point first, and he does.
Well, we'd need some substantial examples of the abuse and the anger before I could detail that question.
There's a lot of it out there.
When I cut the clips like this, it makes it very easy to see these hidden presuppositions, but in real time this can be difficult. One simple thing that you can do to make it easier on yourself is to purposely assume a relaxed posture, as Jordan does throughout this entire conversation. Now, this posture actually helps you to think less frantically because your body is signaling to your brain that everything is okay, you're in control. You will also want to give yourself some time to pause after each question, which Jordan definitely does. In addition, you're going to want to study up on frames and frame games, because there's clearly a whole level of conversation that is going on behind the words. Now, I've talked about this in other videos, specifically the one on Tyrion Lannister from Game of Thrones, and I'll leave a link to that in the description if you want to check it out. Moving along though, the last clip contains a small example of the third conversational bully tactic in this video, which I'm naming the smash technique. Take a look.
So you're not going to say to your followers now, quit the abuse, quit the anger.
It's subtle here, but Kathy smashes together two very different terms, abuse and anger. Now, by ending on anger, it'd be easier for Jordan to just forget it and answer the question, but that would tacitly accept that his followers were abusing people. That's why the smash technique is so frustrating. People are embedding hidden statements that you actually disagree with and then moving through them before you have the time to voice that disagreement. You may also have seen people barrage you with questions just to overwhelm you into having to accept their points like this.
Otherwise, why would there only be 7 women running FTSE 100 companies in the UK? Why would there still be a pay gap, which we've discussed at length? Why are women at the BBC saying that they're getting paid illegally less than men?
It can be easy to get overwhelmed and to lose focus as you try to answer all of these questions, but with the smash technique in general, the best policy is to slow down the tempo of conversation and tackle one question or one point at a time.
Do the same job. Well, that's not fair, is it?
Let's go to the first question. Those are complicated questions.
So hopefully now you're more aware of the so you're saying trap when people assume the sale, and of course the smash technique. This moves us to the second section of this video, which is how to persuade someone in these kinds of situations. And I will say, it seems to me that it doesn't look like Jordan is necessarily trying to change Kathy's mind, but simply to debate in front of an audience. There are still some valuable tips to be gleaned from this video and a few things that I'd add. First, do not strawman the other person's ideas, even if they're doing it to you. And to be clear, I don't know if I mentioned this, strawmanning is when you create a caricature of their ideas and then attack those rather than what they truly believe. Instead, show the other person that you are truly engaging in their real points. Attempt to understand them. And sometimes this means that you have to ask them to repeat themselves so that you can.
Seven women, repeat that one.
There's 7 women running the top FTSE 100 companies in the UK.
Okay. Well, the first question might be,
after you've made an honest attempt to understand them, you need to make sure that they can understand you, which is necessary for persuasion. And to do that, you often have to use visual imagery. For instance, here's a very abstract point without any images that Jordan makes.
That it's inevitable that there will be continuity in the way that animals and human beings organize their structures. It's absolutely inevitable. And there is 1/3 of a billion years of evolutionary history behind that.
Now, maybe you can understand that, but it kind of lacks any emotional oomph. But notice how the addition of a concrete example makes that 1/3 of a billion years just feel different.
Right, that's so long that 1/3 of a billion years ago, there weren't even trees. It's a long time.
So adding concrete examples, especially ones that people can easily imagine, is a smart, persuasive move. And lastly, when you're arguing, oftentimes the best way to get someone to change their position is not by changing their mind, but by gently showing them that they're already agreeing with you. I talk about this in the frame video, but here's an example from this interview.
Why should your right to freedom of speech trump a trans person's right not to be offended?
Because in order to be able to think, you have to risk being offensive. I mean, look at the conversation we're having right now. You know, like, you're certainly willing to risk offending me in the pursuit of truth. Why should you have the right to do that? It's been rather uncomfortable.
This is huge. Jordan is no longer arguing that her point is wrong. He's arguing that she already agrees with him. Her behavior and her previous statements demonstrate that she cares more about free speech than not offending people. And then Jordan doesn't try to make this point wrong. He shows her how they're actually very much in alignment.
You're doing what you should do, which is digging a bit to see what the hell's going on. So and that is what you should do. But you're exercising your freedom of speech to certainly risk offending me. And that's fine. I think more power to you as far as I'm concerned.
And then, of course, Kathy feels stumped because she does actually agree with Jordan and she's proven it herself. People have a strong desire to remain consistent with things they've already said and done, so oftentimes this becomes one of the few ways to persuade someone who's really dug in their heels. You're basically showing them that they don't have to move in order to agree with you. They already do right where they're dug in. And then, of course, Jordan hits her with the gotcha.
And I'm just trying to work that out. I mean,
Ha, gotcha.
you have got me. You have got me.
Now, even though I laughed at that phrase at the time I was watching the interview, I have to say that last bit, gotcha, does not improve Jordan's persuasive case. It actually makes Kathy feel silly and wrong, as opposed to happy to discover that she and Jordan are really on the same team all along. And if I had to give one last point of constructive criticism, it would be that Jordan answered all of Kathy's questions rather than trying to proactively address her deeper, unstated emotional concern. And in my opinion, that emotional concern is that Jordan is her enemy, that if he believes something, it must be against her interests. If Jordan could have found that and pointed to a more common ground that they share, which we all of course have, I don't think the interview would have continued in such an argumentative fashion. But Jordan's role isn't necessarily to convince Kathy Newman of anything, it's to debate for an audience and to promote his book, which I think he did at an A+ level. If you think that I missed something or you just want to discuss, leave a comment below. I'm actually going to be checking periodically, but I will be most active in the comments for that first hour after the video goes live, which is now 2 p.m. Eastern on Mondays. So hit subscribe and hit the notification bell to make sure that you're notified when I'm here and chatting. That way you can hop on if you want to discuss anything with me or if you have a question that you'd like to ask. I also think that this video makes a very strong companion for both the Tyrion video that I mentioned about frames, which are super interesting, and the previous Jordan Peterson video, which will teach you how to get respect without being a bully. So click the screen if you want to check either of those out. Hopefully you guys enjoyed this video, and I will see you in the next one. Ben Shapiro is one of the most famous and skilled political debaters out there, and even if you're not into politics, his arguments are fun to watch. In this video, I want to explore why Ben is so talented in debates. Specifically, I'm going to give you 7 techniques that you can use no matter what side of an argument you represent, even if you're on the wrong side. 3 caveats before we begin. First, I am not saying that Ben is right or wrong on any of his points. What I'm going to discuss are some of the rhetorical devices he employs that can be persuasive even if they aren't always logically foolproof. No matter where you fall on these issues, there's a lot to be learned from Ben's style of debate. Second, you probably don't want to focus on debating in your interpersonal relationships because the goal of debate is quite different than the goal of most relationships.
Or you're debating somebody on a stage, in which case your goal is basically to humiliate that person as badly as possible.
And third, Ben obviously does quite a bit of research, which is really tough to combat without figures of your own.
If you're richer, you tend to be married longer on average. People who are poorer tend to get divorced more
Where did
often.
you get that statistical
The
trend
Census
from?
Bureau.
Now, research is necessary, but I'm more interested in the tactical side of the debate rather than the prep, so I won't go any further into it. Let's begin then with Ben's defensive debate tactics, starting with catching non-arguments. And that's because not everything that sounds persuasive actually constitutes a valid argument. For instance, when you hear that 9 out of 10 fill-in-the-blanks believe something, that doesn't necessarily prove a point. That is an argument from authority, and though it might be compelling, more evidence is required to be deemed conclusive. So when people lean on authority in arguments, Ben knows to call them out on it, like in this example.
We urge you to listen to the American public and to the law enforcement community in support of ban on the further manufacture of these weapons. That was Ronald Reagan.
Okay, so? I mean, I can disagree with Ronald Reagan.
You keep one of the great right-wing presidents of modern times agreed with me.
So?
Another common debate tactic that maybe isn't done on purpose and doesn't constitute a valid argument is getting emotional, particularly when the other person gets upset or offended. Now, when Piers Morgan did that, Ben wisely didn't engage him because simply being offended doesn't prove anything.
Excuse me, standing on the graves of the children that died there. How dare you?
I've seen you do it repeatedly, Piers.
Like I say, how dare you?
I mean, you can keep saying that, but you've done it repeatedly. What you do, and I've seen you do it on the program.
The late Christopher Hitchens put this same idea rather bluntly.
If someone tells me that I've hurt their feelings, I say, well, I'm still waiting to hear what your point is.
Right.
Now, you don't necessarily need to be that abrupt, but pointing out that a point needs something beyond simple emotion in order to make it valid can make other debaters flustered. And from there, you can segue into the third defensive tactic that we're covering in this video, which is pushing for specifics. People often hold very broad opinions very strongly without necessarily being able to articulate what they mean concretely. And of course, this happens on all sides of the political spectrum. So when Ben is grappling with a very broad-spanning charge, he takes the necessary first step of pushing that other person to provide specific examples.
I don't know what the Republican beliefs are. I mean, you're a young guy, but you certainly remember 2 years back when beliefs were completely the opposite of what they are now.
Well,
they were
which
for
ones?
free trade.
This is absolutely critical. Do not get wrapped up in defending generalized statements, even if you don't like them, because if any sort of blanket label is asserted against your position, or it's large institutions that are being branded one way or another, if you try to defend against that single phrase, you are already buying into an argument you don't understand, and that would be absurd. So instead, push the other person to relate exactly what they mean specifically, like in this example.
What are you even talking about? When you say institutional racism, it's too broad. You at least have to name me the institution. Which one is the racist one? Which institution is racist? Tell me which, so we can fight it, seriously, so we can fight it together. I want to be on your side. I do. I want to fight racists. I think racism is, I think racist behavior is evil. I want to fight it with you. But I can't fight it if you're not showing me what it is.
Similarly, and lastly on the defensive side, Ben knows his arguments inside and out, so he doesn't get sucked into defending points that his argument doesn't require. For instance, in this next clip, Ben is talking about how Trump will say outrageous things knowing that it sets the media ablaze. And his point is that Trump knows what he's doing, and he does it on purpose in order to control the news cycle. Now, when Don Lemon responds saying that Trump shouldn't be doing that, Ben doesn't bother defending the morality of his actions. He's only talking about the purpose of them.
Says some things that are outrageous, like people in the media aren't patriotic, knowing that people in the media are immediately going to turn it up to 12 on the Richter scale.
But Ben, don't you think he should be truthful in his comments, even if he's funny, and if you give him that, shouldn't he be truthful? And he wasn't.
Of course, and I think that this is where the media. Here's my advice to people in the media.
Now, recognizing that you can and should agree at points with the person that you're debating seems obvious, but it can be especially hard to do when people insult you. A general rule of thumb is that if the other person winds up attacking you, you are actually winning the debate. So Ben usually doesn't get sucked into defending his own honor, and he shows a great example of that here.
Called it a hit piece, and in it, writer Jane Coaston says you have hollow bravery, calls your campus speeches shadow boxing, and if you wanted to be genuinely brave, you challenge, quote, some of the wrong-headed ideas held by your right-wing fans. How do you respond to that?
Number one, I've never really attributed bravery to myself. I don't think that it's brave to walk on a campus and talk to kids. I think it's brave to be a member of the military. I think it's brave to be a cop. I think it's brave to be a firefighter. I don't think it's brave for me to walk with a security team at my side onto a stage. If I thought that I was going to get shot and murdered, then I probably wouldn't do it. So I don't consider myself part of that group anyway.
Ben wisely doesn't bother defending his own bravery and instead sticks to the points that he knows are strongest to his argument. And that takes us to Ben's offensive strategies. One of the big ways that I see him stump his opponents is through the use of snuck premises. Essentially, you introduce the exact point of contention as a given, and that's through the clever use of language. Now, this isn't to pick on Ben because we all do this from time to time. So first off, see if you can find the snuck premise in this next case.
From Planned Parenthood, as you may have noticed, I'm mostly against abortion. If you want to go to Planned Parenthood and get a contraceptive, go for it. I don't care. I do care when you start killing babies. This is a problem for me.
Again, a snuck premise introduces a contended point as a given, so what counts as a snuck premise shifts with each position of each person involved in a debate. Now, in the context of the abortion debate, pro-choice versus pro-life, what is the snuck premise that Ben just said? Here it would be the words, kill babies. This entire debate hinges on the personhood of the baby/fetus, and using the word baby implies personhood. So with that word, Ben is able to sneak in a premise that most of his opponents would probably disagree with, but he does it in a way that they don't notice, so they are stuck coming to the same conclusion that he does. Here's another example, this time in a debate over the morality of socialism, communism, and other economic models.
Income inequality in the United States is also quite high, right? There are people who are Bill Gates and Jeff Bezos, and then there's the local checker at your grocery store. But if the local checker at your grocery store is getting richer, then it seems to me they have nothing particularly to complain about in how the economy is operating. They don't have a right to Jeff Bezos' money. They don't have a right to Bill Gates' money any more than Bill Gates or Jeff Bezos has a right to their money.
What is the snuck premise in this case? It would be the idea that it is their money. A socialist or a communist might see the money that an owner of the means of production has, aka another rich person, as being stolen. So it wouldn't be their money in the minds of a socialist or a communist. But when Ben assumes the idea that it is their money, he makes a point that, again, his opponents might find disagreeable, but they won't really know where to poke the hole because they adopted his premise as soon as he said it. Now, in my experience, most debates are won or lost on snuck premises. In concealing the steps we take to arrive at our conclusions, we can get there without the other person knowing exactly how they disagree with us, but still being stuck. So if you want to win cheaply without having your ideas challenged, this is an excellent tactic. That is how you can win a debate even if you're wrong. But to the degree that you can catch yourself, you're usually better off avoiding this, and it's usually more insightful and better for the relationship to bolster the opposition side, as we discussed in our video on Jordan Peterson, which I will link to below. Again, not to pick on Ben, just pointing this out as an example. I'm going to leave this for now and move to another effective rhetorical tool that I see from Ben. It's moving from the abstract to the concrete, and it looks like this.
I think that focusing on poverty is a good thing to do. I think focusing on income inequality is not a good thing to do because there's no correlation between income inequality and relative rates of poverty. Right? There's tremendous income inequality in a lot of places on planet Earth. In fact, in all places on planet Earth. If you go to Sudan, there's going to be a rich warlord there, and then there are going to be a bunch of people living on $6 a year.
This works because the specific example seems to prove the broader point that preceded it, even though a single example cannot prove a rule. It is useful shorthand for persuasion and explanation. I do this all the time with the examples that I give you in these videos. It's very, very common. And when you add an element of humor to the specific piece that you are saying, it makes it even more persuasive because people can be so wrapped up in laughing that they don't necessarily evaluate if they disagree with the point that you made.
The people who are currently acting in criminal fashion in the drug war aren't going to be out acting as model citizens as a general rule. A lot of those people are going to be committing other crimes because this has been the history of the United States. When you make a substance illegal, the people who are criminals were criminals before and they're criminals after. Al Capone was not going to turn into a banker after Prohibition ended.
And the final piece for this video, at least, is that you want to emphasize the conditions under which you would agree with your opponent. What evidence would you need? Now, we previously saw Ben do this with regards to institutional racism in a previous clip.
Racist behavior is evil. I want to fight it with you, but I can't fight it if you're not showing me what it is.
Here he is talking about Trump's impeachment and the Mueller investigations.
But
dude, I'm happy to wait for the Mueller indictments, and if they come down and they target Trump, I'm happy to see him impeached. But I need to see evidence. Where's the evidence?
But just throw it in the trash.
And if he throws it in the trash or quashes the Mueller investigation, then yes, impeachment should be on the table.
Thank you, Ben.
When done in good faith, this is a really admirable way to build consensus and settle a debate. But since I said that this video was going to have elements of how to win even if you're wrong, this can also be used as a smokescreen to make your opponent lose sight of a more effective way to win an argument and instead focus on giving you the evidence that you asked for. By the way, I am not saying that that is what Ben is doing here. I'm just saying that when you outline the conditions of what it would take for you to reverse your position, it can work as a diversionary tactic. So there you have it, 7 reasons that Ben Shapiro is so difficult to best in a debate, and 7 ways that you can win even if you're wrong. Joe Rogan has the most popular podcast on the planet, and I think a huge portion of that can be credited to the fact that his audience respects his authenticity, especially in the face of conflict. So in this video, we're going to talk about 5 things that you can do which will command respect in those tough situations without having to act like a jerk. Now, the first thing that Joe Rogan does that cannot be discounted is that he is a trained fighter. He knows how to defend himself physically, so he's more likely to speak up around people who act violent than you might be if you were afraid of getting hurt.
Doria, Jonathan, come on over here.
I am not happy.
You're the biggest on the planet.
Hey, what are you doing? What are you doing? You can't assault people. What are you doing?
Oh, but it's called
strategy. He's yelling at you. You can't run up to him and hit him.
When a lot of us see this sort of terrible behavior, we may not want to speak up. We fear that someone is going to get in our face and escalate things to a level that we don't want to go. And a big value of knowing martial arts is not that you go around picking fights, but that you feel more comfortable saying what ought to be said, knowing that in the worst case scenario, you can protect yourself, which is exactly what happens here. The guy who is dating this woman gets into a shoving match with Joe, and rather than knocking him out cold, Joe simply puts him into a tie clinch so that no one gets hurt, and hopefully the guy learns a lesson.
Look, if you and your husband hit each other, that's one thing. You don't run up and hit other contestants. No, hey, hey, hey. No, hey, hey, hey. No, hey, hey.
He got in Joe's face.
And then he got too close to Joe.
Please, please. Oh my God.
And then all of a sudden they start going at it, and I was like, all right, I gotta break this up because Joe's gonna kill him.
Hey, 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 hey.
But physical confrontations are the exception. Usually we're more afraid of the social consequences of confrontation. Joe is okay though if people do not like what he says. He believes that honest conflict has more social value than dishonest harmony. And that means that he's going to risk upsetting people, being yelled at, or being despised if telling the truth requires it. Take the Carlos Mencia incident several years ago. Carlos had been stealing jokes for less famous comedians for years, and it was an open secret in the comic industry. Almost no one did anything about it until Joe Rogan walked on the stage with Carlos and started chewing him out in front of a live audience.
You did another joke the other day. I saw you do a joke about licking the ass. It's like licking a battery. I saw a guy do it in Vegas. I go, well, that's where he got it from. The Reverend Bob Levy from the Howard Stern Show.
All the other comedians who valued social harmony as paramount kept quiet and just whispered about Carlos behind his back. But nothing changed, and Mencia got more famous off the work of these other comedians. It took Joe standing up in front of an audience that started out not very receptive in order to actually make a shift.
You don't know that nobody supports comedy. You don't know that nobody. If someone steals a riff from a song, that shit's in the news constantly. Motherfuckers steal shit and make it on HBO. They steal put it on television. What are you saying?
And to be clear, Joe had to do this publicly because when he would ask his comedian friends to speak up about what was happening, they didn't even want to say it on the record. That's what happened with Bobby Lee, for instance, in this next clip.
Do it. Wait, where's this going? Who cares? It's reality.
Anyway, it's good to see you.
This is the reason why comedians get away with stealing. Because comedians like you are afraid of confrontation.
This can be a tough but critical mindset if you want to be authentic and command respect. The intermediate stages of confrontation are usually not fun. Sometimes people will yell at you and you're likely to feel very uncomfortable. You're usually not going to want to bring the issue up, whatever it is. But if you want to stop a particular behavior and you want to win the respect of everyone else who is thinking the same thing but is afraid to say it, you must speak up. Now, this same thing applies to telling friends difficult truths. In this next case, Joe's friend, Brendan Schaub, was a heavyweight UFC fighter who had looked very sloppy in several fights and whose lack of technical ability was liable to get him hurt. Now, as a fighter, Schaub wanted to continue past all obstacles. But as his friend and an analyst, Joe knew that the difficult, honest truth could wind up saving his friend from serious physical consequences.
It's not that you don't try hard. It's not that you're not dedicated. It's not that you're not disciplined. It's not that you're not intelligent. There's shit that other people can do that you can't do. If you had a wrestling match with Cain Velasquez, how well do you think you'd do?
Straight up wrestling?
Yeah.
I think people would be surprised.
Really? You think so?
Mm-hmm.
I think you'd be surprised.
Mm.
I really do. I think he'd you up. And I say that as a friend and a guy who loves you.
This was a hard conversation, essentially telling your friend that you don't think he has what it takes to achieve his dream. During the podcast, Brendan was in tears. And you're only going to have the courage to begin these tough conversations when you accept the fact that being nice and avoiding harsh truths isn't necessarily kind, and it's not being a good friend. Encouraging Brendan's dreams could have wound up with him getting serious brain damage. So telling the truth and upsetting Brendan in the short term was actually the caring move from Joe. Now, this isn't to say that you should just blurt out every mean thought that you think. If you're going to be confrontational, you want to do it appropriately. So how should you handle these conflicts? Well, we actually have a full bonus module on this topic in our course, Charisma University. That module goes far beyond what I can cover in this YouTube video about handling conflict charismatically, making the other person respect you more for bringing up these tough issues. So if that sounds like something that you're interested in, definitely check out Charisma University if you want to be more confident in those situations. But for For now, here is what we can see from Joe. First off, it's often a good idea to acknowledge that you don't enjoy the conflict and that the person that you're speaking to may not either. This is particularly useful for situations where you're entering into conflict with someone that you're close to. Take the conversation with Brendan Schaub as an example.
This is hard for me to say because I love you as a friend. You know, it's hard for me to say, but this is just a reality. The guys who are at the top of the fucking mountain, they're performing at a different level than you. It sucks, right? It sucks for me to say it. If I don't like it coming out of my mouth, I don't like it. And the reason why I don't like it is because I love you as a human being.
Whether someone is doing something that is upsetting to you or you're just worried about them, a great phrase to kick off a potentially confrontational conversation is this. You start by saying, look, this is something that I've been wanting to tell you, but I've been uncomfortable about it and I haven't wanted to say it. That sentence opens the other person up and makes them less likely to jump down your throat if the news is on the harsher side. The second tip is to allow for nuanced truth. Oftentimes when we're in conflict, we feel as if we disagree entirely or not at all. So when someone says something, we disagree reflexively rather than listening to what they say and agreeing where possible, like this.
For sure.
Way
But what about the
too much
Gonzaga
damage.
fight?
Well, you beat Gonzaga. It was a good fight. Yeah. You're a very good fighter. That's not what the issue is. The issue is, can you become a champion? If you can't become a champion, are you comfortable with getting knocked out 3 or 4 more times?
Take Eddie Bravo's conspiracy theories for another example. Joe doesn't just say that Eddie is dumb and that every case of his doubt is stupid. Instead, he disagrees with very specific issues that he raises, and in this case, it's Eddie's belief about a flat Earth cover-up.
When you start thinking that the world is flat, the dinosaurs aren't real, all this nutty shit you believe, and you just jump into it with, the problem is, it discredits all these other things that you believe that might be real. Because the other things have some validity to them.
You just haven't looked into it.
Similarly, you want to accept that as certain as you are in your perspective, your opinions and your perceptions are fallible. So avoid statements about being absolutely right and instead speak like this.
Totally. Yes, you could do it. You're a big guy, man. You hit hard. You know, if you land the right shot at the right time. But if I was objective and I was standing outside looking at it from the outside and I had a bet, I would have to bet on him.
Couching your statements like this keeps you from devolving into pointless, is what you're saying objectively true arguments. Because, like it or not, the other person cannot deny your opinion about the facts or where you would decide to place your bets on how things would turn out. Which brings us to the third point, and that's that whenever possible, you want to confront a particular behavior and not a person. In the heat of the moment, it is easy to forget that you don't disagree or hate anyone entirely. It's impossible. What you have an issue with, and maybe it's a huge issue, is a particular pattern of behavior. So that means that you want to avoid saying things like, you're a jerk, which are blanket statements, and instead stick to speaking about the exact behavior that you take issue with.
That's just showing to you that your interest in me is from my friends. No, not from your friends. Oh, from Bobby Lee. Let me tell you. The video on the internet of him admitting it. That's bullshit.
This mentality leads to Rogan's fairly unique ability to like someone as a person completely separate from their political or social views. Now, this is the case with Alex Jones, who Joe has known for years, despite the fact that he disagrees with a lot of what Alex says.
Alex Jones, I love you, buddy, for real. But you say some silly shit. That's where this all comes from. Doesn't mean I don't love you.
You'll see a similar pattern of validating the person while objecting to specific behaviors when Joe speaks to Owen Benjamin about what he writes on Twitter.
I wanted to talk to you about social media. Okay. Because I love you.
I love you too.
I think you're a very good guy. I really do. But you are the worst representative of yourself on social media.
The point is that when possible, realize that you don't have a conflict with a person, but with a pattern of behavior. And if you begin to think that you are in conflict with an individual, you will dig in your heels and make things worse. You're likely to conflate the person with their ideas. And when this has happened in some of Joe Rogan's podcasts, they create some of his worst moments.
Couldn't care less people want to smoke joints.
You're an ideologue, buddy.
Really? That's an ideologue position by saying leave it to the states?
Yeah, you're locked in, man.
Really? And that's
we
what a lot
already
of people
proved you're
pointed.
full of shit about Colorado and traffic deaths. Should we go and you up with this too?
So remind yourself what particular behavior you are trying to change and realize that any name calling beyond that is only damaging the respect that you are building by having the courage to confront the issue in the first place. Now, like I said, if you really want to master those moments of conflict in your life, which can be pivotal for how people respect you, we have a full module on conflict in our course, Charisma University. And if you want to get a taste of what that course is all about, I've set up a video which discusses the 4 emotions that lead to an amazing first impression consistently. If you nail these, you dramatically reduce the risk that you're actually going to get into a conflict like this in the first place, since the other person is going to think so highly of you. And it's not like you're definitely going to get in conflict if you miss these opportunities, but you are more likely to just be ignored or forgotten during that first impression. So if that's something that interests you, click the link in the description, drop your email, and check that video out today. Also, if you've enjoyed this video and you haven't yet done so, make sure to subscribe to the channel and hit that notification bell. I know actually last week we were an hour late in getting the upload up, so if you want to make sure that you don't miss it when it does go live, hit that notification bell. It's super helpful. Anyways, hope that you guys have enjoyed this video, and I look forward to seeing you next time. We often think that getting respect and being aggressive go hand in hand, because unfortunately it's often the bully that gets the most respect in the schoolyard and even in the workplace. But Jordan Peterson is an exemplar of a different way to generate massive amounts of respect. So in this video, we're going to explore 3 main things that he does that force people to respect you without being a bully.
But you can't force me to respect you. It's just not possible.
Okay, maybe not force, but perhaps make people much more likely to respect you. So let's dive into it. The first thing that Dr. Peterson does is called pacing your reality. So even when he doesn't share your beliefs, he shows that he can understand why you might think the things that you do. For instance, Jordan is religious, but listen to how he speaks about atheism.
There's a good case to be made for atheism. I mean, let's make no bones about it. Because you could say in some sense there's been 300, 400 years of brilliant scientists who've been doing nothing but laying the foundation for an objective empirical atheism.
Jordan grants that the side that he does not agree with has really strong points in his favor. And this might sound counterproductive if you're trying to persuade someone, but it actually makes people more open to changing their mind. Because in any discussion, the absolute hardest thing to do is to admit that you might be wrong and risk appearing dumb. That's why sometimes saying things like, hey, you raise a great point, or I totally see why you see things that way is so important if you find yourself in a heated argument. It lets the other person not feel dumb if they wind up changing their mind. This is how Dr. Peterson can get people to open up to his views without having to push them around. You can contrast that with the standard political discussion where 2 sides basically just yell their points of view at one another, like in this clip.
If you work hard, if you get educated, if you're an honest person, you can make it in America.
If you live in a neighborhood where poverty is endemic, it's harder to work hard.
It's
harder to get an education.
Hey, it was harder for me.
No one changes their mind from a discussion like this. So even though it might be tempting to quote-unquote win an argument by making really incisive points that make the other person look dumb, you have to recognize that it actually makes them less likely to change their behavior if you don't also validate something about their position. Now, interestingly, Jordan peppers in many instances of mini pacings into his normal speech. For instance, he mentions what you might be thinking while he's saying things. Just watch.
To those who have everything, more will be given, and from those who have nothing, everything will be taken. It's really a vicious statement. But what it means is, as you go downhill faster and faster. For working with old people in old age homes, and the rule is don't do anything for the residents that they can do themselves. You think, well, that's pretty harsh. It's like, no, it isn't. You're helping them retain their independence. Then he stretches out and he'll go fight again. So antidepressants work on lobsters. Right. And you think, well, who cares? It's like, no.
Jordan will even raise a hypothetical question that you might have and then answer it.
And the idea is that if you can do that, you will transcend the tragedy. And it's like, well, could that be true? Well, Most people admire tough, competent people, so you know it's at least a little bit true.
What's especially fascinating is that once Dr. Peterson has completely reversed your initial position, he's extra careful to not make you feel stupid about it. The other person needs to be able to save face, so he mentions one more time that he's not attacking.
I mean, I get your point, and I'm not trying to denigrate it in any sense. There's a complex issue here.
That's partially why so many people have had their minds changed by Dr. Peterson. He's not trying to make them feel dumb, he's trying to help them, to educate them. Contrast that with the quote-unquote own compilations on YouTube, where one person tries to make the opposing side and the opposing argument seem as stupid as possible.
Be the same. They're against Mexicans, they're against Jews, they're against black people, they're against minorities.
Where are all these Nazis?
Everywhere.
Oh, let's do a quick pan. And let's see them. No, there's one. No. Okay, so there's none here, so where are they?
Which sometimes results in this.
It's not the same.
You're right. You're 100% right. It's not the same.
America unsafe, okay?
You don't have to cry. I know it's hard. No, look, come here, honestly.
It can be tempting to laugh when your side gets one up on someone from the other side. But when you make people feel stupid, nobody actually changes their mind. And while it might feel like you're a winner, you're actually completely ineffective at changing behavior. So if your goal is to make the world a better place, be like Dr. Peterson. Do your best to understand people's perspectives and give them credit for doing their best to figure things out, even if you disagree. On to the second point. Jordan is constantly telling stories and sharing interesting tidbits to keep his listeners' attention, and he flows quickly between a lot of different things. These next clips are all just taken from a span of about 3 minutes.
If you're competent at fighting, that actually decreases the probability that you're going to have to fight, because when someone pushes you, you'll be able to respond with confidence, and that's partly why Jung believed that it was necessary for people to integrate their shadow. When you study Nazi Germany, for example, or you study the Soviet Union, particularly under Stalin, and you're asking yourself, well, what are these perpetrators like? Forget about the victims, let's talk about the perpetrators. The answer is, they're just like you. It's a matter of facing the thing you least want to face. And everyone has that there's this old story in King Arthur where the knights go off to look for the Holy Grail.
That's 5 different topics all in the span of just a few minutes, and you'll notice that they're all of interest to the listener. First, you have that interesting fact about martial arts, then he takes it to a larger historical context, which everyone kind of understands, and then, most importantly, he shows you how it applies to your life. 2 main points here. First is that windy nature of his speech, which keeps people on their toes and interested. Now, you may have experienced someone who does this poorly, talking about every random thing that comes into their mind and completely losing your attention. Peterson's approach works because he is constantly relating everything back to you, the listener. Now, this focus on making things relevant to you is also the reason that he switches to the second person in so many of his stories.
You don't identify with either of those. You know that they're both necessary. You know that you have to live with both of them, but you identify with the capacity to continually transcend what you are.
So far, these are pretty common charisma traits, and you might have seen these before in some of our other breakdowns. But there is one that is, at least on our channel, completely unique to Jordan, and it's kind of his calling card. That is his use of archetypes. The basic idea of an archetype is that it's an idea that resonates across a wide swath of humanity despite differing conditions. It's kind of like a foundational human story. So it's something that we intuitively understand, remember, and move towards. Archetypes are often encapsulated in fairy tales and some of the most popular stories of our age, which is why you're going to hear Peterson reference them all the time.
That's the witch in Hansel and Gretel who fattens up the kids and eats them. How many of you have seen Disney's Sleeping Beauty? It's very difficult to understand Jung outside of a narrative context. And so I'm going to walk you through The Lion King today. The woman encounters this mysterious and aggressive male and tames him. That's the female hero myth, as far as I can tell. It's Beauty and the Beast.
The point of using archetypal stories, aside from being a fun way to reference Disney movies, is that they connect with people on a deep level. They intuitively feel true. And if you can relate a point that you're trying to make to an archetypal story, you are going to be more persuasive. That's actually how Peterson is able to take the unappealing advice of clean up your own room and make it into a piece of advice that probably thousands of people have applied. Now, for those of you unfamiliar with his work, clean up your room is meant literally, but also to say that you need to clean up your own own mess before you go telling other people all the things that they need to fix for you. It's really not appealing advice on the face of it, which is why so many of us ignored our mothers when they told us to do it. But here's how Peterson leads into this advice.
You probably have all watched Pinocchio, and Pinocchio is about how a marionette, someone whose strings are being pulled by forces beyond his comprehension. That's the situation of the undeveloped individual. Geppetto, who's a benevolent father, so a benevolent symbol of benevolent culture, makes a puppet, his son, and then wishes on a star. Now, a star is something that glitters up in the sky, and it's associated with the transcendent.
I can't grab all of this in one clip, and that's kind of the point. If Peterson had just told people, focus on yourself first, clean up your room before you tell other people how to live, well, he'd have been about as effective as a motivational poster. But in couching this advice inside of an archetypal story, he makes it truly connect and actually changes people's lives. That's why I think the ability to tell a good story is the most underrated charismatic trait. If you can build the story in an archetypal structure, that's even better. Now, this is a big topic and one that I spend probably over an hour on in Charisma University course, but for now, I'm just going to link to a few storytelling videos that we've done in the description below if you want more on this. I do want to touch on one more point, though, and that's that Peterson can win respect without being a bully because he encourages dialogue. Now, one of the first clips that put him on the map, and his most viewed to this date, was a heated argument. And throughout this clip, he calms students down when they start getting in shouting matches with one another.
Because they are not being integrated into society. We are not looking for special treatment. We are looking to be able to integrate ourselves into society. And if you refuse to,
He also pays careful attention to the students who do engage him without screaming.
Drags people like me are not speaking fast because they see an avenue in what you're saying to do what they want. Even if that's not what you meant, they see an avenue in your
Add all this up, and what you realize is that perhaps the biggest thing you can learn from Dr. Peterson is that if you want people to respect you, and you don't want to do it in a domineering way, you have to consider the other person. You consider their reality, and you pace it in your speech. You consider their attention span, and you wrap your points in engaging stories. And you consider that they may have something to teach you, so you speak with them rather than shout at them. Now, we focused a lot on respect in this video, but that's actually just one out of 4 emotions that are going to create an amazing first impression on anyone cross-culturally. Now, if you're curious what the other 3 emotions that you want to create in that person are to make an amazing first impression, I made a video on that breaks down what those 4 emotions are so that you can start using them today to consistently make killer first impressions. If you want to see those, go ahead and click the link in the description, drop your email in the box, and you will get access to that video. Also, as we've grown, it has been harder and harder for me to respond to all the YouTube comments that we get, but I do have a solution now, and that is that for the first hour after I upload a new video, I'm going to be responding to your comments. So feel free to write in if you're watching this, or if you want to catch me next time, go ahead, click subscribe, and then click that notification bell so that you get an announcement as soon as the video goes up, and you can write me in the comments. That way we can converse and dialogue. Woohoo! So anyways, I hope that you enjoyed this video, and I look forward to seeing you in the next one. You might be sabotaging your first impressions and not even realize it. And it's not because you're making some big, terrible mistake. It's because a lot of the advice that we've all received over the course of our lives is incomplete. And if you take that incomplete advice and you apply it to the wrong situation, you're going to get a bad result. So in this video, what I want to do are talk about 3 pieces of advice that need tweaks to actually work in the real world. And when you add these tweaks, you'll go from sabotaging first impressions to really, really hitting home runs. And the first one that I want to touch on is this. A lot of people aim for harmony in first impressions. They do not, under any circumstances, want to create conflict. But the truth is, when people cross lines, even in first impressions, the best thing that you can do is set a boundary. I want to give you an example so you can really take this home. This is one of my favorites. A friend of mine, a little ways back, was at a company, it was a finance company, and he was presenting to the head honcho boss. This guy's worth $100 million, flies around on private jets, and was generally an abuser. Like, he was verbally abusive to everybody in the office. So he's got this meeting, and he's pitching to him whether or not they should invest in a company that they gave him to research. And he gets around to the end and he says, so based on all my research, I think that this company is a pass. It's just too risky. Head honcho guy David stands up, looks at him, the rest of the team, and says, you guys are pussies. Everyone else there gets quiet because they've taken this kind of abuse before. But my friend is not used to this, right? He's never been treated like this. So he looks right back at the boss and says, David, where I come from, calling another man a pussy is the worst thing you could do. You would immediately start a fist fight. Don't ever call me a pussy again. And he gets quiet. And everyone in the room gets quiet. And David gets quiet. A few seconds pass, and I'm sure they must have seemed like eternity. And David says, I'm sorry, I won't ever do that again. Completely goes back, meeting starts rolling, people pick up the slack. But what happened is after that, my friend never, ever received that kind of abuse that people in the office continued to get from him, right? That guy never gave him any crap. Again, it's because he set a boundary. And even though he was low man on the totem pole, he created respect. This is what happens when people cross lines. I'm not saying that you need to shout their faces off. Neither am I saying that you need to do what most people do and just go, hee hee, you know, it's okay. I've seen people do this in so many situations, right? Somebody makes a racist, a sexist comment that they don't like. In a business meeting, somebody shows up really late, doesn't respect your time. Or I know a girl in a business meeting, she was basically being hit on by the guy and didn't know what to do, so she just kind of laughed it off, pretended that it was just a joke. In these scenarios, what you need to do in so many words is say, one, hey, I don't appreciate what you just did. And two, don't ever do it again. And then quiet. That is it. I'm not asking you to yell at someone. I'm not asking you to take it home. I'm not asking you to complain about it with your friends. If you do this, you will find that the boundaries you set create more respect in all of your interactions. Incredibly powerful. The second thing is kind of a light version of the boundary setting, and it's this. A lot of people hate to disagree with anyone in first impression. And it's because we know that people like people that are like them. They want people that went to the same school as they did, that like the same sports teams, that have the same interests. So when somebody says something that maybe we don't share, we tend to gloss right over that and look for the commonalities. But the truth is, when you bring up things that are not commonalities, in fact, that you might be polar opposites on in the first impression, you create a ton of trust. Another example, because I love these. First time that I went to Brazil, I was in Rio de Janeiro, and I went to the Copacabana Palace. A really nice place. Don't know if they still have parties there. If they do, check it out. And I walked in, hung around for a while, and I saw a girl that I really thought was very pretty. So I walked up, started talking to her, and I began to speak in Portuguese after a few sentences in English. And she said, oh my God, wow, your Portuguese is awesome. Like, you must be so intelligent. The people in this city are just not. They're not worldly at all. And that was, one, a really nice compliment, but two, it kind of struck me as, I don't know about this, because I was in Rio and I found the people extremely friendly, outgoing, exuberant, fun. And her sort of emphasis on these people are dumb was a bit of a turnoff to me. So I said, listen, first off, thank you very much for the compliment. My Portuguese is only good, not because I'm some sort of savant, but because I used to study Spanish. But I gotta say, for me, the most important thing about any individual is not that they've traveled to a bunch of countries or they're worldly or that they have a super high IQ. It's that they make the people around them feel good and that they're fun. And she said, yeah, but you know, fun is shallow. I would prefer a guy that was intelligent and worldly any day. And she kind of looked at me going, be that guy. And I was tempted to. I wanted to go, oh, you're right. You said I was this guy. You like this guy. Perfect. We're going to hit it off. But I had to continue to say, so, I mean, listen, I would take both, right? I want fun and intelligent. But when it comes down to it, the people that I connect with the best are the people that spread good vibes, the people that are happy and fun. And honestly, if they're not the sharpest, if they haven't traveled the world and they don't speak 6 languages, they just lived in their city and they have kind of an insular view, I don't really mind that. I just care that they're a good person. And we agreed to disagree, right? Right in that moment, she said, well, that's not how I am. And we continued to talk. But what happened was that a tremendous amount of trust was built between her and I, because I was willing to disagree with her and she was willing to disagree with me. And what wound up happening is that we did connect. I spent the rest of the week that I was there in Rio with her. She let me stay at her place when I got kicked out of my hostel and left me alone in her house while she went to work. And I do believe that a huge component of that trust that was built was because so early on I was willing to say, listen, we might not be a match. We might not work out. And if we're not a match, that's totally fine, but I'm going to be transparent about it. When you let people know about the ways that you disagree with them, not shoving it down their throat, but just saying, hey, that's not how I am. We can totally agree to disagree. I'm not trying to convince you, but you should know that's not my feelings. People trust you so much more. So that's the second piece to making a really good first impression is sometimes the things that you don't have in common can be just as important as the things that you do have in common. The third piece is this: fake it till you make it is often misinterpreted. And it's a great piece of advice, don't get me wrong, but fake it till you make it applies only to body language and nonverbal communication. When you start using fake it till you make it in the things that you say, that's when you run into trouble. So for instance, the CEO who had a terrible quarter speaking in front of his company gets up there and says, hey guys, we're doing great, you know, not exactly what we want, but this is really on track and our numbers were kind of off in the projection, so we're killing it right now. Or, right, guy at a networking event who goes off and pretends that he has a kind of status at his company that he can hook people up. He goes, you know what, man, just send me your resume, I'll get you a job, no problem. And he's got no such power. This happens all the time. People fake power that they don't have. Or a guy who wants to impress a girl, takes her to a nice restaurant, really great. But rather than acting like, you know, this is a special occasion, pretends that this is something he does all the time. That kind of stuff does not fly. So here's what you want to do. Fake it till you make it in the way that you speak, in the way that you carry yourself, your tonality, the way that you gesticulate, the way that you breathe. That's going to affect your head, which is going to actually change the way that you feel, right? Your physiology does change your emotion. And we've talked about this at length. I don't want to go into it here. But when this comes to the things that are coming out of your mouth, be honest to a fault. So for instance, that CEO might get up there and say, guys, listen, this quarter was a disappointment. We did not hit our numbers. We didn't do the things that we needed to do. I've spoken to many of you. I've reflected on what needs to happen, and here's how we're going to do it going forward. The confidence that he speaks with is what's going to inspire people to hang on, to continue. And the honesty is going to make them trust him that, holy cow, like, we can do this. He's not just going to sugarcoat everything. Take the guy who takes a woman to a nice restaurant, right? Rather than going in and being like, oh yeah, pretending he knows the maitre d', or that this happens all the time, or talking about his investment portfolio, whatever it is, he might go in there and say, listen, I gotta be honest, this place is way nicer than the restaurants I normally go to, so I hope that you're impressed by the food and that makes you laugh extra hard at my jokes, right? Play it off fun, funny, but you can let people know this is special, this is nice. That honesty is going to let her know, which is a huge concern for women, by the way, that the men that they're dating are not being real, are not being honest. When you show things that might not be to your favor, right? And you're not doing it in a calculated way, but you're doing it because it's honest, that's going to create a bond of trust between you that is actually going to make the relationship go much, much better. The thing that ties all three of these together is this. The charismatic person, the person that is comfortable with themselves, is comfortable with the truth. And they can sit with it and they recognize this is going to make me connect really well with some people, and some people are not going to connect well. But I will not be disrespected, I'm not afraid to share my opinion, and I'm not going to pretend that something is the case when it's not. So that is the thread that ties them all together, and I hope you see it in our other videos because it's a big one. There are other things that can sabotage first impressions. In fact, one of them is the order that you create these 4 emotions in. There are 4 emotions that create an amazing first impression. Get the order right, it's amazing. You get the order wrong, it's sometimes not so great. So if you're curious what that is, hit the link here. It's going to take you to another video that shows you what those 4 emotions are, and more importantly, shows you the order that you need to hit them in, because that's the thing. A lot of people create them, but they don't do it in the right order. So if you want to see that, click the link, drop your email. It's going to take you to that video right away. If you guys have liked this video, please subscribe to the channel. We're making more of these videos, at least one a week. It's going to show up on your homepage when we do it. You'll see my face, or you'll see a charisma breakdown. And sometimes we do people that are fictional characters like Tyrion Lannister, anyone from Game of Thrones. We did Muhammad Ali, maybe Arnold Schwarzenegger coming up. But we take these very charismatic people and break down exactly what they're doing so that we can learn from them. So those are some of my favorites. They take a long time, but should have one of those coming very soon. So if you want to see them, subscribe to the channel. And of course, any comments, any questions, drop them in the comment box below. They inspire a lot of these videos and a lot of the people that we do breakdowns of. In any event, I hope that you guys have enjoyed this video, and I look forward to seeing you in the next one.